I have to read the books from all 10 SPFBO winners over the last decade before December so I can rank them in the Champions League. And today we're taking a look at Where Loyalties Lie by Rob Hayes. This is a grimdark pirate fantasy novel that won the SPFBO 3 award, and it kind of reminded me of a much darker version of Pirates of the Caribbean. It's about a bunch of different pirates who are struggling to survive as the civilized societies start to build a navy to destroy the pirate outposts. Drake Morass is determined to unite these unruly pirates under one banner so they stand a chance against the rising tides of war. He must win over enemies, colonize hostile territories, and survive military assaults to achieve this self-serving ambition. So with that context in mind, let's go ahead and dive into this indie review. The Immersion I gave a 9 out of 10. Obviously, because we're talking about pirates, most of the setting takes place on the seas, although you do get a little bit of differences from like the ships to actual islands to other outposts, so you do get some variety, but that's the main setting of the story. And it is described really well and does help you to get immersed into the overall narrative. It also gives you a lot of histories about the different continents and pirate outposts and the different rivalries between the different pirate groups and the different alliances and betrayals that there are. So there is a lot of subcontext that's going on throughout the story that just helps you to just get sucked in. And it was also fun to see the different types of religions. So obviously the pirates are going to worship the sea goddess, and the people who are more land-based people worship their land god, and there's some conflicts there throughout the story. And there was just such knowledge and depth into the mechanics of this world that it just felt really easy to get involved with and just kind of get lost in. And that brings us to the names, which I gave a 10 out of 10. Now, this is a multiple POV fantasy, which I like because I like getting different perspectives from the different stories to paint a wider picture of what's going on. The first person that we kind of focus on is Drake Morass, and he's the one who is trying to unite all of these pirates. He's somewhat of a silver tongue, but at the same time, nobody really trusts them. I mean, nobody really trusts pirates in general, but him in particular. Everyone knows that Drake Morass only cares about Drake Morass. Then you've got Keelan Stillwater, who is basically known as the greatest swordsman on the sea. He is a pirate who used to sail with the ruthless Tanner Black before he stole a ship of his own. He does have honorable intentions, but is often just dragged into the dark, gritty world of pirating despite his best efforts. So it's kind of fun to see the conflict that he has between his motivations and just the world and circumstances that he's in. Then you've got Elena Black, who is the daughter of Tanner Black, and she's a super ruthless pirate, mostly so that she can impress her super ruthless, notorious father. And she also just so happens to be in love with Keelan, which comes with its own set of challenges later on the line. The decisions and dialogue were just so realistic and brutal throughout the story. I might not have liked all of the characters, but they were incredibly tangible throughout. Grimdark almost always does a great job with its character work, allows the author to really delve into the reality of human nature as opposed to trying to give someone a more idealistic character trait. So I think it's just kind of easier sometimes to relate to people who are just as corruptible and imperfect as the rest of us. The magic, I had to give a 6.5 out of 10. And the reason for that is because there's just not a ton of it throughout the story. You do have Beck, who is basically the bodyguard for Drake Morass, and she's an arbiter of one of these land gods that exist. And one of her powers is that she's able to basically force the truth out of people, also grant her extra strength and stamina at times as part of the magic system. There's also some ancient magic that we see on some of the islands, but we don't really get to learn a lot about that. It's kind of more in passing that it's just kind of mentioned. And Drake Morass knows a seer, who's basically the one telling him his destiny and how to accomplish it. And there are a few sea creatures throughout the story, like we get to see something like a kraken really briefly spotted near the surface as they're sailing. And there's also like these sand monsters that they have to exterminate from an island when they're trying to colonize it. But that's pretty much it. So for that reason, just because we didn't get a ton of exposure to it, I had to ding it a little. But it still had enough to take it beyond just like a typical pirate book. The infrastructure, I gave a 7 out of 10. I could see people arguing this in a couple of different ways. If you're arguing that this is a character-driven book, then you could argue that the plot is just based off of the character development and choices. For me, from a plot perspective, I sometimes feel like Grimdarks just don't really care about the plot. They're just so focused on characters that the plot kind of gets lost, to the point where when you're finished reading, you kind of are left wondering what the point of the story was. So it is very character driven. We don't get a lot of plot outside of just Drake Moras's singular ambition to unite the pirates, but the character development and arcs were enjoyable for the most part. But yeah, I just felt like the plot was a little flat. And also sometimes the pacing just felt a little bit slow. Again, just because we're doing a lot of chatting with the characters to get to know them better, rather than taking action in the story. Still a very compelling read. I just think Grimdark as a whole struggles with plot because they invest so much time into their characters. And that's okay. And that leads us to the enjoyment, which I ended up giving an 8 out of 10. I liked it. It was a little too grim for my liking at times.
Like with what happens to Elena?
That was tough to get through. But overall, I'd say it was a very solid read. I just have a hard time with Grimdark as a whole because sometimes I'm just left wondering, you know, I spent all this time reading this story and almost nothing is accomplished by the end. So that sometimes is hard for me. It wasn't as bad as the first Law, but it still felt like the climax was somewhat shallow. So that leaves Where Loyalties Lie with an overall score of 8.1 out of 10. If you like Grimdark and you like pirates, then you're gonna love this book. It's definitely rated R with some pretty graphic spy scenes here and there, so viewer discretion is advised. And overall, I can see how this book ended up winning the SPFBO 3. We'll just have to wait and see how it stacks up against the champions. Now let's go ahead and judge a book by the cover. I think the cover is excellent. I like how different it is from typical fantasy covers. We see a lot of people staring into the distance, but I like how this just kind of shows some vague destructions of the ships, just to keep it a little more ambiguous. It kind of reminds me a lot of like a Loch Lamora style of a cover, focusing more on the setting rather than the people, which is ironic because the Grimdark focus is more on the people than the setting, but I digress. So that'll do it for today's video. If you made it all the way to the end, be sure to join the Indie Fantasy Club, like this video, share it with your friends, and tune in for the rest of the SPFBO rankings. But that'll do it for today, so I will see you in the next video.